Today on the show, we're welcoming Kara Stafford. Kara is here to share her knowledge and wisdom about the myofascia, the vagus nerve, and different ways to activate, stimulate, nourish, take care of these areas of our anatomy. Really excited about the conversation and Kara's wisdom. I hope you enjoy the show. We'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome back to our show. Today, sitting across from me is a dear friend. Love this woman. So Kara Stafford has been teaching Pilates since you were 17, which is completely new to me. That's amazing. You are the owner and creatrix, which I love the word creatrix, by the way. That's such a beautiful word, of Zebra Mama Clothing Company, which I have a pair of pants that you custom made for me, which are fantastic. And then certifications, you've got a litany of certifications, 500-hour yoga teacher training, aerial yoga, yoga tune-up, and then you're working towards a role model certificate, which is a deeper understanding of the myofascia release and the tune-up balls and things like that, right?
Yes.
Man. And, and it doesn't surprise me that you have this litany of all these things that you do, because every time I talk to you, you have this new thing that you're like, hey, guess what? Here's this new thing I just learned. I'm like, yeah, let's talk about that shit. How's that? How weird is this stuff? And so, and so one of the reasons I wanted to have Kara on is because of the random knowledge that you have. You have so much amazing random yogic knowledge, and you utilize that knowledge in a way that not a lot of people do. We're going to talk a lot about like props and straps and just vagus nerve, a lot of stuff today. But one of the things that really drew me to conversations with you in the beginning of our friendship was your in-depth knowledge of props. And I'll just quote this as my own ignorance. I always thought props were used for people as a crutch. And that was my ignorance. And that was before I started teaching yoga, because we've known each other for a while before I started teaching. And but that was one of the things that drew me to you, is that like the couple times I took your class, you're like, get a block. And I'm like, I don't want a fucking block. I don't use a block in my practice. And you're like, get a goddamn block. I'm like, okay, fine, I'll get a fucking block. And it's an integral part of your class. You use it for a lot of things. You use the straps, you use the MFR balls, you use all these tools that, to be fair, I'll speak for myself, that myself as a yoga teacher don't really utilize. Didn't utilize, I should say. So that was one of those things that just drew me to you immediately. Was like, cool, you're doing shit that I don't do, and you're really excited about it. So there's some stuff there that I just don't understand. So just starting off, like, first off, thanks for being here. You're awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. What drew you to props and the understandings of, like, what kind of put you on that path?
It really started with my Pilates training. That is part of I will not say all trainings. So I'm super old school, to date myself. I started teaching back in the day when people didn't know what that word was. It was not a household word. Mm-hmm. Most of the time, if someone came to me, they would say, what's this pilot stuff I want to do? And I didn't start out with the intention of teaching. I actually started out at 14 practicing something I was a little dancer student and had asked my mom, I want to take these lessons. Well, my mom was really good about making sure that I had kind of a balanced background, in the sense of like, you can take this many classes, but if you want more than that, you're going to have to pay for them yourself. You're going to have to figure that out.
All right.
So, that's just the things that you do. And when I was taking the classes as a dance student, I realized how much easier my other movements became. And my mentor, I asked her if I could shadow her so I could write a paper when I was in high school, because I was sure that I was going to go to school and I was going to study dance medicine and I was going to rehabilitate dancers, because they are really hard on their bodies.
So
and if you're familiar with George Balanchine and the destructiveness of his choreography, there was a lot of broken bodies at that time.
Wow.
And that is originally what I thought I was going to do. So I was going to write this paper and observe my mentor. And I spent lots of hours in her studio watching her teach. And then one day, 2 clients showed up and there was only 1 teacher.
Ah.
And so she said, I need your help. So here I am, 17. I think my client was the age that I am now. So probably a 45-year-old woman. Not intimidating at all.
Good for you.
No, that was sarcasm. Freaked out. Like,
yeah.
I don't know what to say. She's like, you practice this all the time. Oh, okay. I distinctly remember laying on the carpet next to this woman who was on the reformer, which is the main piece of equipment, and talking her through the things as I was doing them. I was like, well, Kara, that's not really the way that we, you do what you do when you're learning, but it was clear, like, that's not really a sustainable way to be teaching. So it just sort of evolved into that. She was my mentor. I took classes from her. I learned from her. I did work trade. But part of that practice is the idea of closing the chain. So you will have a strap in your hand, or you might have a bar as you do roll-ups to close the chain. You can see I'm doing all the movements that no one's going to see.
Right. Arms are moving.
Yes,
things
very
are happening.
physical. And so it never occurred to me that you would not do that. And maybe some of that is also dance. Like, where does my body begin and end? Sometimes that's not very clear.
Okay.
So when you can close the chain and you can activate muscles in a way to create that proprioception, and then when you remove that prop, there you are. Now you know what you're trying to feel or what you're trying to activate. So I didn't realize that wasn't really a thing for a lot of people in yoga. Some of that is also, again, the teachers that I was drawn to also use props a lot.
Yeah.
Tiffany Cruikshank uses props a lot.
Yeah.
Jason Crandall, we use props a lot. So it's normal to me. It's not weird, but I did realize when I first started saying, okay, get a block, students would come into class and they'd be like, I'm like, but you can't do this thing without the block.
Right.
So I finally just was like, it's not optional. Grab a block. At the end of the day, you can choose not to do something, but you're not going to have that same experience if you don't have the block. And it's going to become really obvious. And so usually if I have someone that's really resistant, it takes about 1 class for them to realize, okay, she said get a block. I need a block.
Yeah. I'm not skirting this thing. I need the damn block.
Yeah.
You've used the term close the chain a couple times. Can you explain what that term means?
Yes. Okay. So if you are moving in an open chain, like let's say you're reaching your arms overhead.
Okay.
And you want the idea of your hands moving towards one another so that you could hug in around your shoulder blades and shoulder muscles to activate the shoulder girdle.
Okay.
You can try to create that with your mind, and if you've trained your muscles, then you can figure that out pretty easily. But if you actually put something in your hands, it's called closing the chain, right? The open hands being the end of the chain.
Gotcha.
Or pushing into a wall if you were going to do like a balancing pose and put your foot on the wall. Handstand, if you're going to kick up against the wall, you're closing a chain. I don't know that that's really the technical term for it in that specific, but if you were going to do like an L stand against the wall and your feet are on the wall, you've now closed your chain. You're not free floating in space.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Very cool. I'll have to use that. I often search for a phrase when I teach handstand workshops and things like that to kind of get that point across.
Yeah.
Like that. Close the chain.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. There's on blocks real quick. So traditionally, I don't know if traditionally is the right word. What I see a lot of in the studios are the standard, like 3-sided block. You have that block that's about 4 inches wide, 8 inches long, about 6 inches deep, something like that. And then you have half sizes of those, and then quarter sizes, right? But mostly we see those big solid blocks. But now I've been seeing a lot more blocks with that are like let's say, wood material that are hollowed out on the inside that have bars in them, right?
Cool.
That people can use like in downward dog, right? And then
Okay.
you can be in downward dog and you have your hands like in a fist around that bar and utilize that wrist strength. There's a group of teachers. I think they're from California, but the group's called Authentic Movements.
Okay.
They do a lot of trainings in Costa Rica, teacher trainings, and their style of yoga is very, very movement based. It's really interesting the type of movement that these ladies come up with and then their flows. But one of the women, Erin, uses a lot of that block in her practice, and she usually posts stuff like this is my flow that I'm working on today and stuff like that. So it's just really interesting to be able to watch her and the way that she integrates those blocks, because she never lets them go. She'll do eagle pose, right? When then use the blocks, right?
Yeah.
And then bind up as much as she can and then do warrior two, and like have the weight of those blocks out there.
Yeah.
And when she cartwheels down, she's in her chaturanga and having the blocks right there. Like, it's such a cool alternative or just different layer of your practice to add something like that to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah, definitely. And there was a while when I was working on my handstand practice, I used those cork blocks because they're a little more dense. But I would have one block under each one of my hands on the lowest setting in a downward dog, for example. And then, lift my heels, bend the knees, jump forward, and catch myself in a crouch. And that was how I started to practice the protraction of my shoulders, to get my shoulders open enough so that whenever I was kicking through to sit down or maybe to kick up to a crow pose, I would have that protraction and really have my hands gripping the block to engage that shoulder girdle like you were talking about, to push up and out,
Yeah.
to train my brain to be able to do it without using the block.
Yeah.
So I guess in kind of a way, that was a chain that I was closing kind of with my hands to teach my hands how to claw instead of just be flat on the mat.
Yeah. Well, and your brain is so smart that once you train that muscle memory pattern, you've got it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use a block every single time you do a practice, but now you've trained that. A lot of times I will use a block to help people figure out, inner legs, outer legs. What happens if I try to pull apart? What happens if I squeeze in? That activates the muscles differently. So for different poses, you're going to want different things happening depending on what you're working on.
Definitely.
And so just creating that awareness, then when you move into something bigger, now you know how to activate those muscles. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And there's a lot of body movement happening in a yoga practice. So when you can find those ways to isolate the stabilizing muscles and really show like, hey, when you do this, here's this block to show you the engagement, but this is what this engages and this is how this is benefiting you. When we can draw those dotted lines and connect those dots, like, it really does land for people in a different way.
Yeah.
Like, I have a client right now that is recovering from a stroke, and one of the things that we're working on is pelvic floor engagement. And one of the best things that I can find for him right now with his mobility is bridge pose with a block between the knees, and to squeeze those knees and lift your hips.
Oh, yeah.
Engage your pelvic floor.
Yeah.
Know that you're squeezing inward and engaging your adductors.
Yeah.
And it's, man, the benefit that he's gotten from that, it's really, really helped out a lot.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have had that without the block there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. With so I took your class last week. And when I got in there, you said grab a block, grab the MFR balls. Did we have a strap also? I don't think we had a strap.
I don't think we did last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've taken individual MFR classes, like where it's not all we're doing. I shouldn't say that, but what we're focusing on is like head to toe MFR release. We have the different size balls. Start with the feet, kind of work your way up, and usually 60 to 90 minute class. It's beautiful. It's amazing. The main classes I've taken from that were from Tang.
Tang's so awesome.
Oh my gosh. So I've had Tang on the podcast a couple times.
Tang.
And I never realized how sneaky Tang's humor was until I took his MFR classes. Because I always knew Tang as like this peaceful Buddhist monk. He's got great classes. He's kind of funny sometimes, but he's very stoic and like very warm and gentle. And then I took one of his MFR classes with a friend of mine, Timmery. And at first, hearing Tang say, "Oh, I've dropped my balls," and I'm like, the child in me is like, yeah, he said balls. That's just
Yeah.
funny to me. This stoic, gentle human being is like, oh, I have fun vocabulary too.
Yeah.
But then after halfway through the class, when he'd said it 17 times, I'm like, he's doing it on purpose. This is Tang's sense of humor. He's like, oh, you can put your balls back in the ball sack. And I'm like, he's doing this on purpose. He's making these jokes on purpose.
Yes. Oh, yes. Tang is definitely messing with you. When I did Jill's training, she was very specific about these are your myofascial release balls or your massage balls, and they are going in a tote.
Tote, I remember you saying that a couple times.
Not a sack, not a, but it brings out the teenage boy in all of us.
Really does.
I was teaching a myofascial release class, and there was a couple in the front row, and I could not look at them when I was teaching because these two ladies were giving each other these looks, and I knew exactly what they were, and I was like, I can't. I'm just going to have to look at the other side of the room because I'm going to lose it.
Yoga already gives us too much awkward material to work with.
Right?
That we don't need to layer in more things.
Yeah.
It's like, God damn it.
Yeah. It's like, try as I might. Yes.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I'm not sure with COVID. Maybe the masks help a little bit because I find that having to teach through that, I'm a little more careful about my sense of humor because, you can see my eyes, but not the rest of my face.
Right.
Less what I'm telling you to do comes across as something really not intended. Yeah.
I had a big understanding with that, eye-opening moment with that kind of concept with COVID also. So my voice before I started working on it was very monotone. I took an acoustics class back in college a long time ago, and one of my projects was you have to figure out the acoustics of a certain thing, a room, an object, whatever. So I decided to do my mouth. Right, the acoustics of my mouth. And through that experiment, I found out that my speaking voice, my traditional speaking voice, is the same frequency as background noise. So my voice gets muddled a lot. And some of the studios we teach at, they have the louder heaters, and that's white noise mixed with my background noise mixed with vocals of artists going on and the music. I drown myself out a lot. So the coaching that I had in the beginning was speak like English is my second language. Lift leg, step through, warrior one. No flowery stuff, just get the point across, get to it. So when COVID happened and we went Zoom, I put a microphone on and, I'm like doing my Zoom classes. But I didn't realize how many jokes and how many things I said underneath my breath or within just proximity of the people that could actually hear me that I knew and I could make, not off-color jokes by any means, but, we save our humor for the people that would appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
And the first Zoom class that I taught, and I was, walking around my living room, making these jokes and stuff like that I normally nobody could hear. I'm like, oh, I have a microphone on now. Everybody can hear everything I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, fun. Let's alter this a little bit.
Bring it on.
But through that, now I realized I was able to work on my dialogue, and through that, I was able to clean up my projection and work on the way I projected. And now a lot of my classes I speak like a radio announcer, so the fluctuation of my voice will help cut through all the white noise, but with the projection. So, we do find out those fun things about ourselves, when the situations change a little bit.
Oh, yes.
Mask for you, microphone for me.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yep.
So with the MFR balls, so you were drawn towards that. Was that through your education with props, with Pilates, or was that kind of just something new?
So I was first exposed to the myofascial release when I was doing my 200-hour YTT with Tiffany Cruikshank, now called Yoga Medicine. She would use them in our practices. So it was awesome. We had our very intensive teacher training experience, and every evening before bed we would have a practice, and she would usually incorporate some MFR. So you would do your practice and then off you go to bed. But I didn't at that time it's interesting, I guess. You notice things when you're ready to notice them.
Right.
We were using tennis balls, which is a little bit of a different experience. You can still get benefit, but I'm going to say I am partial to those rubber balls. They make a
Same.
huge difference in how they grip the tissue.
And they're not so hollow too, right? Is that part of the grippy part of that? Is that
Yeah,
they don't
so
concave in?
yeah, they have a little bit of give to them, which you want when you're working on your soft tissues, but they also have grip to them. So Jill always says skin for the win. If you can get those grippy balls on your bare skin, it's going to give you a shearing effect, which is basically taking the skin and the fascia that's underneath and moving them in a different, pulling them in different directions, which helps to hydrate your fascia, helps to bring circulation and sensation to the tissues in a way that you're not going to get if you're just have this tennis ball that's just pushing in.
Right.
So, yeah. So I was exposed to it there. Something came up, and I ended up teaching a workshop at one of the studios on myofascial release. Suzanne Height brilliantly suggested,
Love her.
name it Recover Like an Athlete.
All right.
And it went really well. And at the time, I was like, oh, maybe I don't know enough. Maybe, that whole imposter syndrome. So, okay, how quick can I learn this better so that I can teach it better in a way that people understand it? So I did that, and then I found Jill Miller. While I was doing that, I found her book, which is the Role Model Method. And that is very comprehensive, great resource if you want to know more about what am I rolling? Why am I rolling it? What are some different techniques I can use? And I used that book to teach the class, but it really wasn't until I met Jill Miller and took a class from her at a yoga conference that I knew, okay, I need more of this.
Found your teacher.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, before we move on with MFR balls, do you mind explaining what the fascia is?
Fascia. Okay. The long version, the short version. Fascia is your interconnected network in your body. So all of your muscles, all of your joints, all of your organs, technically all of your cells have fascia around them. It is a network of, I don't know if even tissue is the word, that gives your body its shape. My favorite description from this anatomist, Gil Headley, is muscle is just fascia's bitch. Because it is.
I love that.
A lot of the time when you think you have a tight muscle, it's not the muscle, it's the fascia around it that's lost its slide and glide. So underneath your skin, you can touch different surfaces and feel different types of fascia. So the back of your hand, that's very thin layer, right? But when you move that slippy, grippy that's under your fingers, that's fascia. You can grab the cartilaginous part of your ear and rub that. That's also fascia.
Okay.
Every single cell has fascia around it. What's weird about it, it baffles us, and part of why I think it's been so misunderstood is it's not a vascular structure. So it does not have blood flow like your organs have blood flow.
I don't think I
There's
realized
blood
that.
flow to your skin. It has tons of nerve endings in it. In fact, your fascia has 250, I want to say 1,000 or a million, now I can't remember, nerve endings that terminate. So you have the nerve bodies are somewhere else, but they terminate in your fascia. Just give you sensory information.
Interesting.
Your skin only has 200 million.
Wow. And there's no blood flow going to your fascia?
There is no blood flow to your fascia.
Wow.
That's right?
Wow.
Fascia has been, we now think that it plays a part in your immune system. It gives you information because it has all these nerve endings embedded in it. I would venture to say, although I don't know that I've heard it formally stated this way, that it communicates with your vagus nerve.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because your vagus is your longest nerve in your body, runs from your head. It's actually two nerves, technically, cranial, number 11, that splits off. But it gives you sensory information in your gut, in your tissues, in your all over the place.
Interesting.
And so it is a tensegrity structure, which means it's very strong. It's very flexible. Sometimes it gets sticky, like sticks to itself. Like, when you pull your saran wrap out and you're trying to put it on and
it touches each other.
Gets stuck to itself, and then you can't get it apart. And it doesn't stick to the thing that you want it to stick to. That's fascia when it's not at its best, right?
So like when you get up in the morning and like have that good morning stretch, and like, is that like your fascia kind of like opening up and like releasing itself from around you and all that stuff?
It's movement.
Movement.
Yeah. So yeah, how do you keep that tissue alive? Because it is a living tissue.
Right. Yeah.
Movement.
Yep.
Bodies are made to move. The fascia is made to slide and glide and slip, and if we don't move it, it just dries out and gets sticky. So this is a graphic description, so anyone that's vegan that is sensitive, cover your ears. But when you look at a piece of meat and you kind of see that clearish, yellowish layer, that's fascia.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah. And so, like, if you imagine you overcook a turkey and that white meat gets all like dried out and gristly, that's kind of what happens if we don't, move, hydrate, do all the things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The way you talk about the myofascia sharing information through the body, it reminds me a lot of mycelium in forests, right? Mycelium is what basically not the roots, but for lack of a better term that I can tell you right now, is like the roots of the fungus, right, of mushrooms.
Yeah.
That it webs out throughout the entire forest, connecting to trees, connecting to all different, all the different plants in there, and sharing that information.
Yes.
Like it'll help the tree. Let's say like, we're finding out a lot about nature now, what we think we're finding out. But let's say like there's like an old ass tree in the woods, right? And there's a bunch of young trees around it. What they're now finding is that old tree is taking the energy that it's absorbing from the sun, because it's the tallest, right? Because it can get the most sun, it can photosynthesize. And then it's taking that in, and the mycelium from the mushrooms is also adding in sugars that the tree can't get. But then they're taking that from the big, let's say, parent tree and taking it to the saplings. And they're sending that out through the mycelium, saying, oh, that little tree over there, it's only about 6 weeks old. It needs a lot of love. This one over there, it's about 3 years old, a little less love, but everybody's getting something.
Yeah.
And through that mycelium, through that information that's being shared, everything gets to where it needs to go.
Absolutely.
Love that.
It is. Yes. I love the way that nature and body mirror each other so
really
beautifully. It's not I don't know, call it what you want. Call it a blueprint, I don't think it's a coincidence that, our whole nervous system, our vascular system, which is our blood, our circulatory system, that would be the same as your vascular. That they all look like tree branches and roots, right? And fascia, oh man, they just, have you ever heard of Body Worlds?
I don't think so.
Okay, so Body Worlds is this anatomy display that I think for a while they might have had one at this science center many years ago, where they inject cadavers with plasticine. So they'll have different body systems. Like some of them will have the muscles that are injected with plasticine. And so what you're looking at is the kind of what the muscles look like. Some of them, they will inject all of the arteries and the veins, or they will inject the nerves, and kind of all the rest of it is maybe displayed more clear in a cadaver body. So they just did the first ever fascia model. It's in Germany called Freya. And fascia is really difficult because it is contiguous. So from the dura mater, the covering in your brain, all the way down to the bottom of your feet, you are a fascial network. You have these cross lines for stability. You have front line, you have a back line, but you could argue that it's a continuous sheet. You could argue that there's different layers and different types. So you have deep fascia, you have what we call myofascia, which surrounds your muscles. That's the one that we roll on and that we focus on. But you have fascia that covers your organs. You have adipose tissue, that layer under your skin, that adipose tissue that everybody complains about, I have too much of. That's part of your fascia.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So yeah, if you actually suck some of that out, you're sucking out those nerve endings as well. There's some consequences to making alterations to your body systems.
So it's not just fat cells we're pumping out when we're liposuctioning.
No.
We're pulling out fascia.
No, you have nerve endings. You have sensory information that's in there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, and then there's the practice of like, let's say I'm going to take some liposuction out of my butt and put it in my lips. So now you're transferring fascia from a body part that it's not supposed to, from down there to now up here.
Is that not trippy?
Wow.
I don't know, but it's just one of those things that came up recently in one of our teacher conversations, and I was like, oh my gosh, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
And now I can't unsee it, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Once the information comes in, it's like, oh shit, I don't know what to do
For
with
all
this.
the times that you think like, oh yeah, that'd be nice. Now I'm like, what?
Oh,
no,
man.
don't take that information out of me.
Yeah.
I need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, but when you form scar tissue, that's fascia doing its brilliant job of trying to repair and recover. So the fascia will come back thicker, stronger. It'll lay down those layers to protect the body.
Now, as that for scar tissue, for example, with myofascia or with fascia release, because when scar tissue happens, it's kind of spider webby, and like you said, it can get kind of calcified and hard, in those places. But can you use MFR balls or things like that to help smooth out that scar tissue so it becomes more, more cohesive with your current fascia system?
You can, with the caveat, you're not necessarily going to break the whole scar tissue apart because it's come into play to help recover and mend. But you can get more slide and glide and more movement among those layers. And sometimes that means not necessarily working directly on the site, but maybe working somewhere else further down the chain or further up the chain to influence that movement. It's kind of like if you took one corner, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this. In my mind, I can see the visual. Like if you had a bed sheet and you just grabbed the corner of the bed sheet and you wrinkled it up in your hand and held it tightly, and that was your scar tissue. You can influence, but you could see the rest of that sheet now has these wrinkle lines from where it's being pulled, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to have down chain and up chain effects no matter what, which sounds scary, but our bodies are so brilliant and so resilient at figuring out ways around to make things continue to function that, the body just does what it's going to do.
It really does, and I don't mean to sidetrack, but there was a documentary I watched recently, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. But there was a gentleman on there. It was a they interviewed a bunch of different people that had overcome some type of disability in some kind of way. And one of the gentlemen that I'm thinking of right now was blind. He's born blind, been blind his entire life. But he trained himself how to be able to ride a bicycle and to be able to operate in the world without having a walking cane or things like that. And what he did is he developed his own echolocating. And so he would walk out into the world, and he trained himself on this. He would walk out into the world and make these clicking noises, and depending on the information that would come back, he would know if there was the density of the thing in front of him. Now he's learned all this, but he could tell there's a car over there. This is a bush. There's a path in front of me. And through that information, through these clicks, he was getting this echolocation back, and he started to decipher this.
Wow.
So he's been doing that for, I think it was 20 plus years, I think, when they finally interviewed him. And so they put him in an fMRI and started to look at his brain and be like, what's going on? What is going on with this guy's brain? And they figured out that his optical receptors, since he wasn't using them, reprogrammed themselves to be echolocating receptors because he trained him to do that. So now he had this intricate part of his brain that was supposed to be used for eyesight that he wasn't using that now became an echolocating device. And he didn't have any formal training. He didn't have any surgeries. He literally just started walking outside and clicking at stuff and figured it out himself. And now that man rides bikes through public parks with confidence. And I'm like, holy shit, man. To your point, like, we have no idea what the body's capable of, what our brain's capable of.
Yeah.
You take away one thing, and all of a sudden, here comes this other thing.
That is amazing. Yeah. So that would be his homunculus.
Ooh, that's a cool word.
Ooh, we didn't talk about that in class last week.
What's the homunculus?
The homunculus is your brain has a map of all of your body in it.
Okay.
If you Google it, you can see these really cool pictures of a brain in these like giant hands because you have so many sensory nerve endings in your hands, right? This is how we experience a lot of the world. So there's a big part of that map dedicated to your hands, your eyes, your tongue, right? There's smaller parts like maybe your hip joint is not going to be as mapped out because the sensory information that you're getting from that is less, right? So you can add to that map. You can create more detail, like your zoom in, right? Wow. By informing your body of these movement patterns. So is this not what we are always doing when we're in movement practices, right? When you're training yourself, how to align when you're moving in different ways, right? This is what I love about the myofascial release work. You're mapping your body. You are literally putting a map in your brain. And that's what always fascinates me is, you know, when you were in my class last week, you were telling me how, oh yeah, I didn't realize how tight this was or how, right?
Yeah.
And you think, I live in this body. How did I not know this about me, right? And yet, we're constantly learning new things about this little God pod that we're walking around in, you know?
Pod, yeah.
That is from Chris Carr, and I love it.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, your God pod.
Well, that, you know, and that actually brings up a good point because, you know, I can say until I started doing yoga, and my yoga journey was just a little bit before my spiritual journey, right? Yoga was the movement practice that I found that I was overweight and I was out of shape, and I'm like, okay, I got to move my body a different way. Yoga, we'll figure that out. Yeah. And then, you know, yoga has that tendency to like, yeah, we'll give you the body movement, but we're also gonna teach you some stuff about your brain and your spirituality. And it's like, oh shit, it snuck in. Oh God, it snuck in. Yeah, right. But you know, it's beautiful to have those moments, you know, because it kind of catches you off guard. Yeah. Because you get into it for your own reason, and all of a sudden the spirituality kind of kicks into it. Yeah. You know, and it kind of like changes the direction of it. Yeah. But it made it so much more beautiful to me to have that spiritual knowledge and to then start to get in touch with my body and realize that my body's not just this machine that I just got to put fuel in every once in a while. If it's bleeding, I'll put a Band-Aid on it. But outside of that, I don't fucking care, right? Yeah. Yoga taught me to be like, hey, why does your right knee on the inside, just under your patella hurt? Like, how do I feel that? Yeah. Where did that come from? Yeah. I always thought my knee was just my knee, and now I'm like pinpointing parts of my knee. Right. You know, and it's so beautiful to realize that it's a cohesive relationship. Yeah. You have your consciousness, you have your body. You know, some people think that your consciousness is ran by your head, you know, or more focused in your head, and your ego is more body centric. Yeah. But it's a team. It's this beautiful team that works together. And the more, like you were saying, which is news to me, the mapping side, that's beautiful. But the more we pay attention to what we're doing, why we're doing, and how we're doing it, the more it makes sense. Yeah. You know? Yeah. And that's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. The mapping of the brain, that's really cool to me because, you know, I have this idea, and it's not my idea, but, you know, that I like to think about is, you know, even if I don't understand the owner's manual, if I'm reading it, it'll sink in. Mm-hmm. You know, and I feel a lot about that with a lot of this spiritual practice that I'm moving towards, because a lot of it, when I read it surface level right in the beginning, it's like, I don't know what the F this means. Right. Like some of the Eckhart Tolle stuff that I've read in the beginning of my journey, I'm like, I understand that these are words that I understand, but the
Yeah.
way you're putting them together doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
But, the more we read it, the more we feel it, the more we experience it, the more it starts to land.
Yeah.
And then that information makes sense. And, so for that, paying attention to your yoga practice, your body movement practice,
Yeah.
just giving your body the attention it deserves. Create that map.
Yeah. Yep.
That's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So now that we've kind of established what the fascia is,
I don't know if I gave you a very good definition. That's not very concise. It's kind of everything. I mean, you could go look up the technical definition, but even that has been so argued. It's very controversial. When you go to a panel of experts and you talk about, okay, how do we define this? It took them several years to make a definition
Holy cow.
that people could agree on.
And it is still being debated?
Yeah. Yeah, and we're learning new stuff all the time. I mean, the thing is that back when people started doing human dissections on cadavers, they just cut through the fascia because they didn't know what it was. What is this spider webby stuff?
Right.
They had no idea what function it had. So really, like, all of the information, all of the understanding that we have is within the last maybe 100 years.
Wow.
Right?
And I'm both comforted and sometimes like shocked by stuff like that.
Right?
Like the idea that we've only known vitamins and minerals are parts of food for less than 100 years.
Yeah.
Like that to me is like, what? No, that's,
Yeah.
But, we don't know until we know, right?
Yeah.
And, there was a guy that I like to listen to. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. He's a rabbi. But he was saying, like, think about how long we've been using tools the wrong way until we finally realize how to use them a different way.
Yeah.
Like fire, for example. Fire in cavemen. There was, that say that there was a scenario where lightning struck and struck a tree and the tree caught on fire and the cave person was walking by and was like, oh, this is interesting. This thing is on whatever this is, right? And tries to put his hand on it. He's like, well, that sucked. I'm not going to do that again. Took it home to show the rest of the cave family. He's like, cave family, I got this thing. And then they threw it down. They're like, oh my God, it's warming the cave.
Yeah.
That's cool, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it was just that for a long time. It scared off people at night. It kept the cave warm. It made them feel safe.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden one day, the family dino died and fell in the fire. And they're like, oh shit, Fred the dino just fell in the fire. We can't waste that. Might as well chop him up and we'll eat him. And all of a sudden it's like, holy cow, Fred tastes way different when he's been in the fire.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now we can cook with this stuff. We just made a new thing. It's like, how long did that happen before we finally realized that, right? Same thing with like myofascia. We've been slicing through that bad boy for centuries, whatever. There's a spiderweb thing. And now we finally have the vocabulary, the understanding to where we can look at that and say, that's something there.
Yeah.
That we've just been kind of bastardizing for a long time.
Well, and how much we don't understand how not only our physical experiences, but our life experience plays on what we carry in our tissues.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Huge. And people don't want to talk about that because, oh, crap. I experienced this trauma. You mean it's in my tissues?
Yeah.
That means I have to, do something with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
But,
yeah.
Yeah.
I went to I did the very first Vipassana meditation I did a couple years, or probably 10 years ago now. No, not that long. But, so you're meditating for 11 hours a day, right? It's silent, so you can't talk about stuff. And it's not 11 hours straight, it's broken up, but basically you're meditating for 11 hours for 10 days straight, no talking. And the only exercise we have was walking around these walking paths. And so the first couple days, they don't give you a lot of instruction. It's just like, hey, meditate, feel the breath on top of your lip, but just meditate. And then after the third day, they start to explain things a little bit more. Okay, so you have, They're like, I bet you have pain in your back and your hips and your knees. Like, fuck yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And the way they described it was those are what they call synculpas. And synculpas are trauma that we've experienced in life that we haven't dealt with. And they found homes in our body and just start to create havoc. A lot of them happen in our hips because we like to call the hips the junk drawer of the body in the yoga community.
Yeah.
But, all of our tension areas, shoulders, back, neck, all these areas. And so the idea with Vipassana is you scan your body, and as you find these areas of interest, because we don't want to label it as good or bad, because then you attach emotion to it, and that just kind of deepens the whole process. Let's say I find a sensation in my shoulder that I want to focus on. I send breath and I send love to that space, and then through that time and that attention, that's really it. It's showing it attention. Hey, I see you. I hear you. I love you. And then that comes to the surface, and it usually dissipates and gets out of there. So, and it's funny because all that information was kind of coming in at the same time for me, the MFR stuff that I was starting to learn in my yoga practice, learning what the fascia was, and then going to meditation and learning that. And I'm like, holy cow, like this is just, the body is way more than I ever thought it was.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any idea. I didn't know what I didn't know until I started to learn it. And we go through those moments of like, oh, I should have known this, and I'm going to beat myself up for not doing this earlier and all this stuff. But like, no.
Yeah.
I had to fuck up a lot of stuff, and I had to get to a place where I wanted to understand this stuff.
Yeah.
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 Because I felt really bad because the first couple days of that Vipassana meditation, I was using those MFR balls. After 11 hours, I'd go back and I'm like rubbing on my hips and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And then that third day, they're like, oh, by the way, this is what all that pain is. I'm like, oh, I fucked it up.
No.
Nope, I needed that
There's
shit.
no messing it up. Yeah.
So you mentioned the vagus nerve earlier, and the vagus nerve is something that is been something newer for me to start to learn about, and it's completely fascinating. Like it's so crazy how much information is going up and down through the nerve. Some of the functionalities are finding with the vagus nerve. How they're relating the vagus nerve back to forms of depression, all these things. That's the information that it carries. What is what brought you to the vagus nerve? Was that through the fascia understanding?
It's funny, vagus before fascia.
Oh,
for me. For a while, I was really big on the idea of detox and detox through movement. Detox is in like a reset, not something is inherently wrong with me and I need to like push things out of my body, but just, we collect stress, we change the chemistry in our brain and in our body through these constant influx of adrenaline and epinephrine that the body is not really meant to have for prolonged periods of time. How do we flip that off switch, so to speak, although it's not really that simple, but it's easy to talk about stress, depression, all of these things where your vagus is basically shut down because you're in fight or flight. So your body can't fully process the things and the functions that it needs to do, like, restore cells completely, recover from stress. Like adrenaline in long-standing situations basically eats away at your tissues. You're eating away at your organs, you're eating away at your muscles, your joints, your bones, all of it. Your wear and tear is going to be more.
Yeah. So your vagus nerve is reactive by your fight or flight. So when you
Yes and no.
Okay. All right.
Initially, when I started studying it, I thought it was really as simple as like there's an on switch and there's an off switch. So you have your sympathetic nervous system, which is basically the one that responds to things. So the one that responds as a fight or flight, or the one that responds to stressful situations. It sympathizes with whatever thing is in front of you that needs your attention. Your parasympathetic nervous system is the one that's like, all right, it's time for me to dial down. It's time for my body to restore. It's time for my breath rate to slow down. It's time for my body to digest, to rest, to replenish.
Okay.
And because of how we tend to live, and the way that we're wired as humans, our nervous systems, like, they haven't fully evolved to where, okay, that guy in front of you on the freeway just slammed his brakes on and you almost ran into him. Your body goes into full on, okay, recruit. I am a caveman. I need to run. The dinosaur is going to eat me. I'm being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. If I don't run, I'm going to be eaten. What happened in those circumstances was you run. Hopefully you make it. And then you're in your nice little cave and your nervous system can settle back down.
Yeah.
But we never had that off switch, right?
Yeah.
So we never, I say never, without consciously coming back to, all right, brain, all right, body, we're safe, we're secure,
Right.
all is well. We can turn that button off. We can let the vagus nerve do its job. And now it can tell our heart rate to slow down, our breath rate to slow down, our stomach to do its digesting job, our guts to do what they do so well, right?
Yeah. There's an interesting, I can't remember where I learned that or where I heard this at, but I think it was actually watching a nature show. But they were talking about exactly what you're saying, like how we build up these body chemicals and these anxious, nervous moments that then we just sit with them.
Yeah.
We don't dispel them in some kind of way. And the point that this narrator was making was, it's like, okay, look at this zebra and watch it run from this lion, right?
Yeah.
It's running its ass off. It knows as if it doesn't make it, it's going to die. So it's trying its hardest. And then it does. It gets away.
Right.
And the lion's like, screw it. I'm not going to do it. Right? And then you see the zebra off by itself, and then it shakes itself violently.
Shake it off.
Just shake it off. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. It's like that nervous energy has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And you see that zebra shake, and it looks frantic, and then it just says, all right, and then just goes off the other way. And it's completely fine. Well, theoretically, right?
The animals know.
Right. And that's, if we could do that.
Oh, I've taught classes where we shake it off.
Yeah. Like ecstatic dance, my youngest kid, we were camping last summer over in Eastern Washington. And there's no poisonous, well, I guess there's poisonous snakes in Eastern Washington, but, I think the most poisonous in the area we were at were little garter snakes.
Yeah.
Nothing too crazy. But it's still a snake.
Yeah.
And we're innately afraid of snakes and spiders and crawly things and stuff. And so my daughter comes running up to me, and she was panicky. She was hyperventilating. She was crying. And I'm like, what's going on? She's like, snake, snake, snake. I'm like, okay, cool. All right, look at me. Take some breaths, and then shake your arms. And she's like, nah, I'm not going to do that. She's 12.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I don't want to look like an idiot. Okay, nobody's around. It's me and you. Shake your arms.
Yeah.
And it took me a minute to get her to understand that. And so finally she did. And I gave her the zebra example. And so she started just like to move a little, like lollygagging a little left and right.
Yeah.
And then she started to like get into it, moving. But after a minute, like she really shook it out.
Yeah.
And then she stopped crying, and we said we were having a conversation. And it's one of those things, like, we know so much about our bodies now that we're still not teaching people.
Yeah.
The somatic responses, the parasympathetic responses, like all these things that we now know, upregulation, downregulation from breath work, from light work, from meditation. But we're still not teaching this to our kids on a regular basis.
Well, and then there's a whole nother side to that too. Your vagus, so your ventral vagus, which is basically your face, the front side.
Okay.
And you have the dorsal vagus. The dorsal vagus is like your primal instincts. So a lot of that we were talking about, that's hardwired, right? The fight, flight, or freeze. So, a rabbit that thinks it's going to get eaten will often just freeze and stare, right?
Yep.
Is that really the best way of survival? No, but that's how that particular animal's nervous system has evolved, right? And so we have all of these things as human beings in our systems. That the thing about the fight, flight, or freeze is that for someone in a traumatic life or death situation, that freeze may actually be what saves your life, because the pain response, the theory behind that. Now, I don't know because I don't have any science behind it. I don't have a personal frame of reference, thank goodness.
Yeah, right.
That's that traumatic. But the idea is that the pain response gets numbed, so that freeze, even though whatever you're experiencing is, potentially really horrific.
Right.
And sometimes there's dissociation. So dissociation with body, dissociation with memory,
Right.
that allows you to walk away from that situation and be alive, right? And then the ventral vagus is, as humans, we co-regulate each other. So my eye contact and my mannerisms and how I respond create safety for you, the perception of safety.
Totally, yeah.
And yours create it for me. So we co-regulate each other, intentionally or unintentionally. Like sometimes people are terrible co-regulators. That's why animals are so awesome, because, when you know that you're with an animal that's safe, you can look in their eyes and they look in yours and you're like, okay. Even the feelings of love or a mother to a baby, like all of these things, these are how we co-regulate each other. All of that is vagus nerve.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting with the times we're at now, that co-regulation, when we can only see a third of the person's face.
Yes.
And we're not able to now see the smiles and see the facial expressions that people have. We can only just decipher what their eyes are doing.
Yeah.
And I bet that is probably running havoc on our nervous system.
In
our
some
central
ways,
system
it does.
that we
Yeah,
don't
it
understand.
messes with your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. There's a friend of mine named Chris. He's a psychiatrist, and he introduced me to the polyvagal theory. And that's the more you're talking about that with the vagus nerve, right? That really makes a lot of sense. If we're that freeze or that fight, flight or freeze, because part of the polyvagal theory is that we put the polyvagus nerve the vagus nerve will put ourselves in depressive states to keep us safe.
Yeah.
And if you have like a child that's in an abusive situation that still is aggressive towards the aggressor, the vagus nerve will maybe put you in that docile dormant state so that you're not being aggressive now, and not that anybody asks for anything like that, but so you're not poking the bear per se. But then to your point that I just realized too, is it's also dampening some of the pain that you might be feeling, so you're not fully experiencing that pain.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the vagus nerve. I didn't know that it split the dorsal on the back and the. Yeah.
It's just different.
Ways
it's
it lands.
different functions, right?
Yeah.
So those are just terminology for dorsal, ventral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there? Do you know of any kind of like newer research being done with the vagus nerve that?
There's constantly research being done. Stephen Porges is my favorite.
Yeah.
Polyvagal theory. He's the one that developed that theory, from what I understand.
Okay.
Brilliant man. I love him. They are now speculating that some of the things that are coming up with long COVID are due to vagus nerve. So there's all kinds of central nervous system dysfunctions that can happen if the vagus nerve gets damaged.
Yeah.
And some of them are more obvious and some of them are less obvious. But what they're finding is some of these people that have, I cannot think of the science name for it right now, but there are people who've had long COVID where they basically go to get up and they pass out because their blood pressure is not regulated, or
Gotcha.
can barely walk somewhere without getting fatigued.
Yeah.
Sudden change in body temperature where they're really hot or really cold, or breath rate changes, blood pressure drops. All of these things are related to the vagus nerve. It's part of that feedback loop.
Right.
So I would be willing to bet that when it's all said and done, when they sort of figure all of this out,
Yeah.
as to why this is happening to some people, or what that root cause is, that it's all stemming from vagal dysfunction.
Wow.
Which is, I don't know how you remedy that except to keep doing things that nurture that system that create tone to the vagus nerve, which is going to be, in fact, the prescriptions that have been happening are breathwork practices. My teachers talked about some different things that you can do to just try to help support getting that fullness of breath and lungs moving and diaphragm moving the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That might be a tough one for a lot of people because of what we're coming out of the COVID and having breath work be a modality, for healing when a lot of people don't really want to be around people and breathe.
Right. It's tricky.
But it's so important. Like I've gone to breathwork practitioners, Camo, for example, in these COVID times on an individual basis, but I've also taken breathwork classes with him, and just it's just so good to have that feeling in our bodies. Like breathwork is such a beautiful modality to get back into your bodies and to understand who you are and what's going on with you, and to really for some people to journey also, but it's such a beautiful practice.
Well, I think some of that, we just have to stop thinking inside of a box.
Yeah.
I mean, I take classes with Jill that are weekly, and I taught a Corges Ball workshop online that was almost all of it was breath-based techniques, stick the ball up in your belly and let your lungs expand.
Wow.
Diaphragm vacuum that I was telling you about. That's kind of like a version of Nollie where you're getting that diaphragmatic movement and that lungs to really be able to do their job more efficiently.
Yeah.
Because if your diaphragm is stuck, you're not going to have full expansion and contraction available to you.
Yeah.
So, there's ways to do it. I've been teaching a myofascial release class online for probably about the last year. And a lot of what we do, because my students are all at home, right? It's in a way it's brilliant because skin for the wind, man. Lift your shirt up, slide your pants down. Nobody's going to see you. You're going to get that myofascial release on all of those tissues that tug and pull, and you can breathe as loud as you want. You can make sound with it. Another great stimulation for the vagus nerve is humming, singing, humming.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
Sometimes when I teach and I have people inverted and down dog, right? That's an inversion.
Yep, totally.
Hum. When I first started doing that during COVID with our masks on, students were like, what? And I'm like, this is for your nervous system. This is maybe not for the aesthetics of your practice. This is for your brain.
Yes, definitely.
So,
I've had a lot of success with that similar concept with energy healing, using mantras, seed sounds, things like that. So, let's say I'm working on your heart area, and the seed sound for the heart is yam, right? And so I'll have my tuning fork or whatever going on in your heart, and I'll also invite you to either say in your head or out loud the word yam, because when you have that vibration, you're amplifying that, right?
Yeah.
And that's the seed sound for your heart. I'm working on your heart. You're working with me. I'm working with you. We're all doing this together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that, just that adding the vibrational tones to it. Yeah. I find myself doing that a lot. I used to, my mom and my dad's passed now, but my mom and dad both were hummers. And my mom still is. She'll just be walking around the kitchen like, nothing in particular. There's no song. She's just always just humming. And it used to drive me crazy. But now I find myself doing it a lot, probably because we take after our parents. But I find a lot of comfort in it. And I think you just connected a dot for me, with that.
Well, and humming when you're scared. So I have an overly vivid imagination.
Okay.
Cannot watch horror films.
Ooh.
I'm still scarred from Blair Witch Project as a teenager. They didn't even show anything.
No, totally. Shaky cameras.
There's enough things, right? I live in the woods. I'm not scared of the wildlife in the woods. I'm scared of somebody jumping out at me at night in the dark. I just can't. So the few times that my husband has been gone and I've had to take the garbage all the way out to the street, which is a long venture, I am humming at the top of my lungs and singing and hoping to God nobody jumps out at me. I'm like, I'm good with the coyotes. I'm good with the bears. I'm good with the owls. I'm good with the raccoons. I'm not good with the humans.
Yeah, these damn people.
Yeah.
And their consciousness and all this shit. But that's I feel that. I'd sometimes much rather surround myself with cool animals than random people.
Yeah. I did actually one day in the summer. There was a homeless man at the bottom of my driveway and I didn't realize he was there. I was walking around looking up because I heard an owl and I was looking for the owl. And all of a sudden I just hear this sweet old man clearing his throat because I'm sure he knew I didn't realize he was there and he didn't want to freak me out. So we had a lovely conversation. I asked him, you have water? Do you need anything? He's like, no, there's some railroad tracks just kind of up from my house. And he's like, I kind of lost my way in the woods and I decided I'd take a rest here. And I'm like, all right, well, okay.
Yeah.
But it was like not what I was expecting.
I would imagine, yeah. Well, good job reacting to that. I mean, just like making sure he's okay, taken care of. Hey, you scared the shit out of me, but
clearly you weren't trying to scare me. Yeah. And I wasn't expecting you to be there. I was busy looking for an owl.
Oh, so with your Coregeous training that you're working on right now, does that link in with vagus nerve? Does that kind of like everything kind of
all connected? Okay. All the layers. I mean, the thing is, when you do a myofascial release practice of any kind, you kind of have to tap into turning the vagus on, to toning it, because if you try to roll on balls and you're super tense, just think about that in your own body for a second, right? No. It's gonna hurt like hell. So bad. Yeah. And you're not gonna get very much benefit from it. Yeah. So a lot of the work that we do with myofascial release is really just getting the nervous system to like take a step back and reset. Right? It's the receptivity. What can I receive? It's not force, it's flow. It's inviting in. It's asking the tissues to release and just take in, if you will, in a way. I almost think of it like giving your tissue nourishment. Right? Yeah. Release, allow, receive, the word that I sometimes struggle with, which is surrender, but it's a surrendering. Yeah. Right? It is integral. I mean, we use breath in a lot of those techniques. I'm thinking, I don't think the class that you took last week, we used it too much, but oftentimes it'll be take a big breath in, hold the breath, contract the muscle, and then exhale and let the muscle relax more. Yeah. Right? Okay. So we do that a lot, especially when you're working into like the quads or the glutes. Anything with the ball and trying to get more breath in. You're going to come to the top of the breath. You're going to create a contraction. So you're trying to almost push the balls away. Yeah. And then exhale and let it all just sink right in. Yeah. 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 Otherwise, you're not going to create slide and glide and movement and hydration in your tissues if you're just scrubbing at them. Yeah. Just rigid the entire time. Yeah. Yeah. That was coaching. I'd have to work with people in the wheel classes when we did the Dharma wheels. Oh, yeah. Sometimes people would get on those and they're just like a plank of wood. And I'm like, no, your spine's... Move with your spine. Yes, let your spine move. I can totally see that. And it's funny, when I started doing aerial again, I didn't realize how much of a fascial release that is. Oh, yeah, huh? Coming back into it, I was like, whoa, I have a whole different body experience than I had the first time I was in here. Like, how could I have been so unaware of this whole other side of movement? But it was the same way when I injured my hip. It was like, how could I be so unaware that I think there were times when I had hip pain, but I didn't know I had hip pain. That sensor in your body that says like, stop, that's enough. You're at the end of your range. Yeah. You don't need to push that. Like, I think I just shut it off. Just wasn't paying attention to it. Yeah. Yeah.
We got to have those reminders sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, this thing said this thing for a reason.
Yeah.
And it sounds like, in a way, the myofascia classes or the myofascia practice is kind of like sneakily teaching us intuition.
I think it's intuition and embodiment. The biggest thing for me is it's embodiment. When I went and I did my training for Yoga Tune-Up, it was so weird because it was right before COVID closed everything down.
Mm-hmm.
And everything had aligned. Like, I was meant to be there. I was telling you that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I could not... I had no idea. The training is probably the most intense training I've ever taken. It's like 7 days. There's a lot of anatomical learning, planes of motion, ranges of motion, muscles, movements, planes of movement. Super intense. Like, I was so intimidated. It was a room full of brilliant people, but all of us, like a lot of us, coming thinking we were going to get more rolling and less of all this other stuff. And Jill was very quick to say, like, this is not the role model training. This is the tune-up training. It's different. But it gave me such a massive base. And she had us at the very beginning. We created, now it's funny you use the term Sankalpa for your ruts. We use Sankalpa as your intention, your purpose, right? So what is your purpose of coming to this practice, or what is your purpose for teaching? And I had no idea when I created the Sankalpa, which was I create space for myself and my students to heal. I had no idea the cascade of events that was going to follow that. And the irony of, before I was in that space, I had been talking to my students about how it feels like the world when you get, like, you're inside a snow globe and somebody turned it upside down and they shook it really hard. And how do you find grounding? And I'm like, did I, like, know without knowing? I don't think I did. I didn't have any idea. But then it just kind of became like, initially I was like, I create space for my students to heal. And I didn't realize how much of my own work I had to do.
Yeah.
And that has been like the last, now we're almost into 2 years. Yeah. Yeah. I hate to use the word trauma survivor, but I taught Pilates when I was younger, and then I stopped, and I was in, a mess. Let's put it that way. Okay. Really bad domestic violence situation. Literally left with one of my babies and my clothes on my back, and that was it. And had to come back later for the other kid. Like, it was bad.
Yeah.
And I thought I had kind of like walked past that scot-free. I didn't realize how much my body was holding.
Right.
And in the midst of COVID, I had like a late onset of PTSD, and I thought, oh yeah, I just outsmarted that. Look at me, I'm so good. I just bounced back. And then I'm like, okay, wait, why am I having these problems where I get this shortness of breath that feels like an anxiety attack, but it's not really an anxiety attack. It comes out of nowhere. Why does my diaphragm keep getting locked up? Hello, that's trauma in the body, right? And I'm like, gosh, the more I delve into this work, like the more my body heals, the more I delve into the spiritual side of it, that when I taught Pilates, it was like, no, I don't teach yoga. I don't do that yoga shit. That's all spiritual. That's not, no, I'm here to like teach you how to move in your body. And the more I realized, like, they're not separate. They're not separate.
Right.
You cannot take one out from the other. You can deny it all you want, but you are a divine being, and you are an energetic being, and none of it's disconnected.
No. Yeah. And that trauma, I mean, we got to, those little areas of our body, we got to deal with that stuff,
Yeah.
And from, and I think a good thing to remember too is that, like, I had to remind myself of this, is that trauma is still trauma, no matter the severity of the trauma.
Yeah.
Right. And so, one of the things I've realized recently is that, no matter how much I try to give my kids the best life, take care of them as best I can. They're going to have trauma from their childhood.
Oh, yeah.
That trauma could be from me not letting my daughter have a toy at Target one time, and she threw a temper tantrum and fucking flew herself on the ground, and we had to leave.
Yeah.
That could end up being a trauma in her life and manifesting in some kind of way.
Yeah.
But the point is we're the only ones that can deal with that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we got to be the ones that that unlock that trauma and to give it the tension that it needs, the love that it needs.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. A lot of times we want to just forget about the thing and push it away, and it's done, it's over with. Why should I think about it anymore? Because if you don't, your subconscious is going to constantly be trying to solve that problem until you solve it.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So get in front of it, face that shit. When you see something you got to work on, if you have the space for it, give yourself the time.
Well, and it'll keep coming back.
It does.
It'll keep coming back for you, right? Yeah.
Oh yes, especially once you realize it.
Yeah. And then it's like, nope, I'm here for you. I got a message for you.
Exactly.
I'm gonna keep talking until you listen, and if you're not gonna listen, I'm just gonna send it another way, right?
Yeah, and that's the interesting and kind of frightening thing, because that's when a lot of people get caught off guard, like, I was totally caught off guard by this heart attack, but you've been ignoring the inflammation in your knee for the past 6 years.
Yeah.
Right. And that inflammation in your knee might just be like, it's just my knee. I just kind of limp sometimes, but that inflammation causes dis-ease, and we'll eventually find another place for that dis-ease to go. And then all of a sudden we have heart problems, we have cardiovascular problems, we have strokes, we have blood clots, we have all these things, because we're just not paying attention to our body and the information, the intuitive, love that is trying to send us.
Right.
But we're just like, hey, body's a machine, leave it alone. It'll fix itself.
Well, and I mean, look how freaking resilient the body is. This is the part that never ceases to amaze me. Like, the awe and the wonder of what it is to be living and breathing in a human body, and every single person that is walking around out there being the human that they are. Like, how many miraculous little things had to go right just for you to arrive here, just for me to arrive here? Like, you're a freaking miracle. If you don't believe in miracles, just open your eyes and look at the people in front of you.
Right.
And so as much as we want to complain about what isn't working or what isn't going right, and I mean, not that there's not sometimes legitimate things to be concerned or upset about, like, there's just, science doesn't explain that completely.
Right.
Like, I love science. I'm like, give me all the nerdy stuff you can. Just don't give me the mathematical equations to have to solve them. I get the theory, man, but I'm not so good with the numbers. They're another language for me. Like, I can understand all the concepts I had to learn in ultrasound school for physics, but as soon as you asked me to solve an equation, it was going to go south fast.
Yeah, I feel you.
But, like, just...
We're magical creatures. We just forgot
we're
how
like
cool
a cascade
magic is.
of chemicals and vibration and sound and energy and electromagnetic currents that somehow end up in a physical body with skin. Yeah. And muscle and bone and a brain and thoughts and ideas, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty astounding.
Yeah.
And that's, when people tell me they don't believe in magic, I'm like, well, there's magic right in front of you every single day.
Look in the mirror.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for this talk today.
Yeah, thank you.
The vagus nerve stuff. This is a newer thing for me, for the vagus nerve, and so thank you for sharing that information. Like that's one of those things that I think I'm going to dive really deep into, and it'll probably become a big part of my practice going forward.
Yeah.
But this information, your knowledge, I deeply appreciate you, love.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending time with Kara and I. A lot of really good information about the fascia system and the vagus nerve. If you have any questions or need to reach out to one of us, please check out the show notes for links to our emails, websites, also any links to the topics we discussed today. And as always, please subscribe to the podcast and share it if you feel somebody would benefit from it. Obeisance and love to y'all. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.